Hey gang, it's KR, King of D&D Homebrew, talking today about the information that encounters give to your players, both about your world and about the style of play that you're employing in your homebrewed sandbox campaign. Because, a major part of players in a homebrewed sandbox campaign, but even in, modules or adventure paths like Pathfinder, is for them to get information about how are things going to unfold in this world? How is the GM going to respond to their activities? And encounters are a very information-rich environment for the players to discover these sort of things. So today I'm going to cover some of the ways in which encounters provide this information to the player, some different styles that you can employ depending on how you want to play D&D, but also how to do those consistently so that the players discover, okay, this is the way the world works. This is what the GM, not expects, but this is how they play the game. And this is how I am going to move through this world. We're going to prosper. We're going to have fun. We're going to have a sense that we're doing things in a way that is most helpful to the party. And then the ways they can adapt the way they want to play their character to that style of play. And I'll say up front, if I'm talking about homebrewed sandbox, you're making up everything. But even in a module, you have this. The only thing is you have a third party, the designer of that module and their intentions, which kind of muddies up the water. And there's some differences there that I'll point out as I go through this discussion. So in my game, I have two types of encounters. Those I plan ahead. I know, where they are, and when the players go into this certain area, there's the encounter. And then I have random encounters. Now, I think random encounter is a little misleading because, in fact, if the players, what they discover in my world is in certain types of terrain or certain areas, there's NPCs, there's monsters and whatever that are living there, hunting there, that sort of thing. And if the players enter their area, there's a chance that they encounter one of those creatures. So it isn't just random. And what I do is apply that consistently so that the players realize, hey, when we move through certain areas of KR's world, there are better chances that we're going to have a random encounter. Sometimes they may want that, but if they're in a hurry or trying to avoid or whatever, and they've figured out a path to go from point A to point B without that, they'll do that. They'll learn about that. So the first thing that the players realize about my world is if you move anywhere, whether in a city or out in the wilderness, over a road, over uncharted terrain, over water, whatever, there is a chance that they will have an encounter that they didn't expect. If they say we want to go from point A to point B, we've got to travel through this terrain, they should expect there's a chance at least that something unexpected will encounter their group. Now in other campaigns, other GMs, they don't have this. You find out information at point A that says, hey, go to point B to do something or get something or whatever, and you know that I'm going to leave point A. When I get to point B, that's when I'll have my encounter. We're not going to have anything along the way. Or if there is an encounter along the way, it's already preset, it's already made. Nothing happens by chance. Now, battles are adjudicated by die rolls, or depending on your system, there are some that isn't, but everything is predicated on what the GM has set up in advance, and then by the actions of the players, what route, if they go, route A or route B to point B, it might change that encounter, but there's nothing random about it. This, of course, tracks with modules that don't have random encounters. Some do. Some have charts and show you if they go through this area, there's a chance of this or that. But others just say if they go here, they'll run into this or they won't run into anything. And again, each module is different. So what the players begin to realize is any encounter that they have, the GM has set this up in advance. And what happens is they think, okay, why? Why did the GM put this here? Is there some information we're supposed to get? Is there something we're supposed to learn? As opposed to my world where they realize, hey, KR, when you go through the, mountains of death, you could run into something. And you might search and see if it has a lair or something, but probably it's just there trying to get food and you got, you were a target or whatever. Or as we'll see, something else happened. But it isn't necessarily something that I said, okay, I'm going to put this here for the players to run into. But there's another very important sort of metagame aspect to the way I run my world with random monsters. You go from point A to point B. There's a chance, based on the route you take, that you're going to run into something, which is that the dice have some control over the way the game unfolds. They control more than just the attack rolls, right? More than just skill checks or however you use dice. They're mitigated by the player actions. They decide to take this route to, and they decide to, get these people to, first I'm going to go here to get some information, but then I'm going to go over there. That might change things. But at some level, there's a role that determines what occurs in the world. These roles affect the progression of the overall story in my world. And for me, this is like a game mechanic of fate, right? Fate controls everything. The Greek pantheon, all the gods are subservient. Even the god, the GM god, is subservient at some level to fate. And for example, the players recently had this battle with these Saugin that are infected by this thing called the Yellow Terror. It's this mold thing they're finding out about. But at the end of the battle, the Saugin tried to put holes in the ship they were on. And I said, there's a certain percent chance that they did enough damage because the players kind of bungled the battle a little bit. So I said, okay, but it was only a 10% chance. And I said that, and I allowed the players to roll. And they rolled 95. The ship was sinking hopelessly. So they had to get into lifeboats, and it changed things, right? And it was random. I had not planned on the Saugin attack was a random encounter. You know how it is when you travel by sea, and then the boat sinking was random. So I'm just saying that fate, I had to react to that too. It might have been easier for me to just go, I'll hand wave that, and you kill the Saugin, and off we go. But I just do that. I like to show the players that fate, even I am subservient to fate. So another really important bit of information that encounters tell players is that geography matters. The type and severity of an encounter, whether it's pre-planned or random, is affected by where it occurs. An encounter that happens just outside the walls of a major city is going to be very different than one that occurs in the frozen wasteland thousands of miles from civilization. Now, this may seem very obvious to you, but in fact, it gives information about your world because it's based on things kind of going back to the earliest days of D&D and RPGs in general. Because most often when you unpack the information that occurs about geography and an encounter, it tends to say that the farther away you are from civilization, the more severe the encounter, right? The bigger chance of running into something really deadly. And this kind of tracks back to a game mechanism in the early days of D&D in which the lower levels you went into a dungeon, the more deadly the monsters, as I've talked about in other videos, that certain types of terrain like swamp or mountains have a higher chance of a random encounter roll. And the severity of the monsters there, depending on terrain, can be much deadlier as well. And there was always this balancing kind of notion of like, why is this? Why are mountains and swamps as opposed to clear terrain around cities? Well, the idea was if deadly monsters hung around cities, you'd think there'd be a lot of food at cities as opposed to a frozen wasteland, right? Well, the humanoids that made these cities would gather together and harass these monsters such that it's easier for them to live off animals and, other monsters that aren't organized as opposed to the areas where humanoids live. And in fact, this always correlated back to the real world in which lions, tigers, wolves, and whatnot were slowly but surely wiped out in areas where there was civilization. But it's a fantasy world. It doesn't have to be that way. So you could have a swamp there's no encounters in there. Nothing lives there of any interest to the players. And you could have bands of Ankegs or Umberhulks that go to areas, civilized areas under farmland or even outside a city and come up and grab things and run off because it's easy prey. But most typically, of course, what we have is if the players have to go from point A to point B, and point B is the temple of ultimate evil in the swamp of pure desolation, they're going to assume, and then this is going to be clarified if they have encounters, that the situation is going to get deadlier and deadlier the closer they get to this temple of ultimate evil. And of course, this can be in a world that, a GM, they have no random encounters. They're just placing the encounters along the way. Some of them are informational, but some are, deadly attack type situations. And typically it gets deadlier as they get closer. And of course, you could have planned encounters in which they just go outside the city. As I said, the Ankegs attack. The thing is, the players get this information. They go, oh, in this world, nowhere is safe for whatever reason you decide. Or in this world, it kind of goes to a traditional setup where the farther you get from civilization, the more deadly the encounters. And the higher chance there is that you're going to get something that's going to be really deadly and such that, you could have a really bad outcome. And so you should be prepared for that. And this all tracks back to the, origins of D&D when you had, as I mentioned, you had a variation in the chance of an encounter depending on terrain, 1 out of 6 in a clear terrain, 3 out of 6 in swamp or mountains, things like that. When you look at the old random monster charts, they change, the types of monsters change depending on the terrain type once you had an encounter and rolled for it. You know, and there was a famous paragraph in the monster manual, which in the first printings, you know, it was before there was a player's handbook, first edition, which gave you the percentages of common, uncommon, rare, very rare, whatnot, such that people used that to determine when they rolled a random encounter what sort of monster is here. And then finally, you had frequency rolls for the number of monsters that would appear in all the editions of D&D up till 5th edition, which basically tells you that the idea of random encounters, at least, and then perhaps for encounters that you're designing in all the editions 0 through 4th, is at a certain level, the monster that appears and the number of them that appears is out of the GM's hands. It's decided by dice. So what this tells the players is, like, you go into mountains, there's a 5% chance you're going to run into undead, 14% chance it's a vampire, almost 20% chance a white, 9% a specter. Then you look at the specters and it's a 1d6 number of specters appearing. That is a potentially deadly encounter for just wandering around in a mountain hex. So what do the players learn with this kind of randomization of these things is that if you go into deadly terrain at a low level, you could die. It is really nasty, and it is something that's randomly determined. You might run into some harmless monster, with hardly any of them, but you could run into something with a high number, and you're in real trouble. Now, of course, 5th edition changes this. What they do is they just show you the stat block of the monsters, and then they have this challenge rating system, and they explain to you how to balance these monsters. It's a little confusing because I have often found if you backtrack and use the math on the challenge ratings, it doesn't quite work the way they claim, and that's because they have some kind of system they don't explain for different abilities and at-will things and all this stuff. And also the problem, well, not the problem. The idea there is it tends towards balancing things. As the players go up, the encounters go up, which means that if you have a group of 5 8th level characters, you're not going to run into 5 CR1 monsters. Some people object to this. They say, hey, where were all these high-level CR creatures when they were first, if they were wandering in the world? Why shouldn't there be out there? There's a chance, again, back to this kind of old school system where just you go out in those mountains, you're taking a chance. And you as a GM may decide, I want to have balanced encounters. I want to have them, hard to deadly, something like that, or medium to deadly. However, there's some range in there that I'm setting, especially if you're setting these up beforehand. But you may also just say, if you go in these mountains, you could run into something really nasty, way out of your league. And they have this in some adventure paths I've seen in Pathfinder, where they have hexes in these maps that they make, where if the players go there, they could run into something very nasty. What you have to do is either at session 0, you just tell the players, this is the way this works, which I was told when I ran an adventure path in Pathfinder with the Kingmaker, I think. Hey, these hexes, this is really deadly. Or you just say, the players know by their backgrounds or by growing up in this world, hey, you wander outside too far into the cities, you go to the mountains of Teeth or the swamp of Ultimate Evil, you're going to run into nasty things, and you better be high level. They're just going to know that. So that if you are having pre-planned encounters or random ones, there's going to be things that are not based on their challenge rating and the group and what's fair. Or you are. Or you have a world in which everything is set to this level so that the players, and they know that. But if you consistently set up your world such that it's deadly out there and you can get killed, they're not going to say, oh, that was unfair. You apply the rules consistently. They know the rules. They discover this. They will accept it. So then and what this means is there's two kind of approaches such that you create encounters that are always winnable if the players don't use bad tactics and get bad luck. Or they're, winnable only if the players use really good tactics, have really good luck, or run away, right? And this brings us to another point about encounters, informational, in terms of your world, is that the players may need to learn that it's not always the best idea to fight. Whether it is, they encounter something that's a much lower CR if you're using a 5th edition or however you want to do that in whatever edition you're playing, and the monsters run away. They see them and they go, oh my God, and they run off. Or they surrender. And the players realize, oh, in this world, things either run away or surrender, and you either they figure this out on their own or you encourage them through some NPC, you can run away too. If you see something coming that looks too deadly, you can hide, or you can run off, use stealth to get away and then run off or whatever. You don't always have to fight, which makes your world a little more interesting than just roll initiative and kill or be killed every single time. Again, when monsters, I've seen, especially newer players, the creatures try to surrender and they just kill them. And oftentimes players want to be neutral or chaotic neutral, and they go, well, that's not evil. These orcs attacked us. And I'm always like, well, depends, who you're with or whatever. If you're with some lawful good person, something surrenders. It isn't always totally cool to just kill it. But they have to learn that, and that's the information they're getting from these kind of encounters. And you can also have what I call atmospheric encounters, where they see something flying overhead way up high and it doesn't come near them, or they hear something off in the distance or whatever, and depending on what they're doing. Again, if you've established that there are random encounters in your world that don't necessarily mean anything, and the players are trying to get to point B to do something, they may ignore that noise over there, or they may just wonder, what is that up in the sky? They see that up in the sky. If they make a big noise and a big thing, maybe that thing flies down to see it and the dragon breathes on them, right? They've made that choice. They know in your world there can be deadly encounters anywhere, or anywhere removed from civilization, or however you've set it up. They have that information. So they look at that and go, well, we're in a hurry and we don't know what that is. They might also say, oh, KR's doing that, almost daring us to, do something, and we're not going to fall for it. Or they want to see what it is. You never know. You've set this up in your world, right? That you don't have to always have these encounters. And here's the thing. If you've established that there's a certain amount of chance involved in a random encounter, in the number of creatures or whatever, however you do this, that there's a chance if they're in certain terrain or truly just randomly, there can be some deadly encounters, the players are going to be cautious. Not just random, but in prepared encounters. You tell them about a group of trolls that are harassing a village. And the players go to the area they know that trolls are patrolling, and they just set up a fire, they do something to attract the trolls, and they're attacked by 10 trolls, let's say. Now, depending on the level and composition of the party, 10 trolls, that could be a deadly encounter. What they'll learn, if that's the kind of encounter, is that they'll work to get information, right? They'll get into the area, get stealthy, try to figure out, try to observe, maybe observe a troll attack, maybe try to get the trolls when they're split up, something like that, because they know if I just go in KR's world and I just start making noise, hey, trolls, come get me, and 10 appear and attack me, now we're in a situation. And the thing about monsters is, yes, some monsters you can try to intimidate, or you can try to negotiate with, or whatever, say orcs or something. You can use intimidate, oh, we're outnumbered here, but I'm going to scare them, or I'm going to offer them some gold if they let us live, or I'm going to try to trick them or something like that. But there are some monsters, say gnolls or something, and maybe trolls in your world where they're just killed, they just want to eat things. So the players learn that early on in your campaign. They get that information about your world. They're not going to be so aggressive and take such big risks. And when the players negotiate, or they hear about this, or monsters try to negotiate with them, they learn about your world that things aren't just, it isn't just a kill or be killed. It isn't just roll initiative to the death. It's they're in the world trying to negotiate their way, and you might be able to work with them in some way. So if you're going to have a city of frost giants, for example, and you run a world where the frost giants they're I think lawful evil in the book, but they just kill or be killed. They hate everything. Well, only way players are going to run into defeat them is to have either a super high level party or all sorts of minions and mercenaries or something. And maybe you can do that. And maybe that's your goal. Or maybe they just pick off frost giants now and again, just to get enough that their group can beat them. But another way to make it more interesting is that if they know that there are chances that you can negotiate with things, and frost giants they're neutral evil, I believe. So how trustworthy or whatever they are, but maybe you do a show of force. Maybe you have something the frost giants are interested in that you have access to. They're not necessarily unbelievably stupid. Unlike, say, hill giants, which the way the book makes them, it's a kill or be killed, unless you just intimidate them and scare them off, and they might run away because ultimately everything wants to live. But once you've given the players the idea of the sophistication of these creatures in your world, it opens up all sorts of new possibilities, new ways to run. It also gives other players, not just the hack and slash players, but other character classes, a chance to shine, a chance to use their abilities to negotiate or intimidate or trick or whatever it is, these monsters that at another level are unbeatable. Because here's the thing, if you do it with monsters that the players could just dispatch, but I need to get information, no, that's one thing. But if they're like, we could be in real trouble here, and they've either chosen to encounter them or just stumbled upon them, now they got to think fast, now they got to work, but they know they've got information in your world that creatures could possibly negotiate, could possibly be reasoned with if you've got something they want. So hopefully that information is helpful to you to think about how your encounters give information to the players about your world, about the way you run, and whatever you do to get the players to kind of think differently as to how they're going to navigate their way through the world based on the way you run encounters and the way they're going to approach storylines and everything else. I think it makes it a more satisfying and enriching experience for both you and the players. And if you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. I'd love to hear comments. As always, I love to hear them and respond to them about how you use encounters, the style you use, all the things that I talked about. Most importantly, though, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose. Tell somebody else about it.